Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson. And there's so much we could talk about with our amazing guest today. He's the president and CEO of National Religious Broadcasters, a man of faith and conviction, and a prominent voice in the evangelical community. Welcome to the podcast, Troy Miller.
Oh, thanks for having me today, Mr. Secretary.
Well, let's jump right into this. You recently wrote an article, I think it was in the Daily Caller, called "It's Time to Get Millions of Evangelical Voters to the Polls." And there seems to be a startling lack of understanding of the First Amendment. What was your purpose in writing that article?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There is a startling misunderstanding of the First Amendment. And I think amongst Christians, there's a misunderstanding of what it means to live out our faith in the public square and to be part of the process, the political process, the governance process of this country. And that's the main reason we wrote the article. If you saw there, the survey that was taken by the Pew Foundation said that less than half of evangelicals were even aware of or followed the major cultural issues of our time. And that's really kind of disturbing to think that as evangelicals, we're called to be salt and light in the culture, and we're called to influence the culture, and yet half of evangelicals don't even follow the major issues of the time. And so we really wanted to address that directly.
And I guess that's particularly important when it comes to speech and freedom of speech and understanding what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, because that's the slippery slope. How do you see that?
Yeah, exactly. That really is the slippery slope of not only understanding what's acceptable or not acceptable in freedom of speech, but also, as you said in the First Amendment, what it means to have the free exercise thereof of your religious rights. And so when we lose that, when we go down that slope, we can see what's happening over in our friends in Europe today. We can see folks who are, have let this slide and slide and slide. And now people are making public comments about opposing policies of the government, or just simply making public comments about what they believe might be the two genders, or what they believe about the family, are finding themselves at crossroads with the government. And look, we've seen many people get fined and now put in jail. And that slippery slope will come to our shores if we don't stand up for the rights that were given to us in the Constitution, and the rights we believe that were given to us ultimately by our Creator.
Well, we used to be sort of the bulwarks. We were the ones, when it came to freedom, don't let anybody touch our freedoms. And somehow we've gotten on this path of accepting restrictions to our freedom. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, and I think there's a number of reasons that we've done that. First of all, I think there's a large push of indoctrination, unfortunately, in our school systems that have taught people a misunderstanding of freedom, that freedom really isn't, as they would put it, free. And it's not. Look, I'm a veteran. Many people paid their lives to keep the freedoms that we have today. But freedom is the foundation that really holds up this republic. It's the idea that we can have the free exercise of ideas in the marketplace, and we can talk about them. The minute you start to take that away, and the minute you induce fear into that and say, well, look, we need to take your freedoms away so that your safety is at risk, or the safety of others that are at risk. But the minute you go down that path, then what you're really going down is a path that says one side is going to control all of the language, one side is going to control all the rhetoric, and you're really down a path of dictatorship, or a totalitarian path that says we are going to decide what is truth and what is not truth. And look, that all we have to do is look around today in the mainstream media, and that's what we're seeing constantly exhibited every day.
And particularly in social media, You know, we saw last week Mark Zuckerberg come out and admit that there was government collusion to suppress certain types of speech. And I think we really saw that in spades with COVID. Anybody who had an alternate opinion, they tried to suppress or at least damage their reputation. Some of these were very smart, reputable scientists, and they just tried to basically bury them. And who would ever think something like that would happen in America?
That's right. Who would have thought that the ideas, especially as you said, out of very respected scientists and doctors, over a political agenda, that their opinions, their well-educated, well-thought-out opinions and well-researched, would be quelched just because it went in contrary with the government's messaging was at the time. And look, we saw the same thing with the Dobbs decision when it came out as well. There were letters written by Congress to the major social media companies that said, if somebody searches for a crisis pregnancy clinic, you should suppress those search results and you should have abortion options that come up first. That was a letter from Congress to the social media companies saying that you need to change the way your search engines work. You need to suppress the message of crisis pregnancy centers because they're misrepresenting things, and you need to do that. And look, we know that Google followed through with that. That's the kinds of things that are going on, the weaponization from our government.
Absolutely. Well, what do you think about Elon Musk, good or bad?
Oh, well, look, I have my background is in IT and in the tech industry. I think he's one of the best modern day industrialists that we have. He's a brilliant guy, but also, look at what he's done when he went out and bought Twitter, turned it into X, kept it as a platform for free speech. I think he's an interesting character in our society today, but you certainly have to say he's a fighter for the freedom of speech out there. Look what's going on with him in Brazil right now.
Exactly.
It's very interesting.
Well, if he had not bought Twitter, changed it to X, we'd be very much in the same situation as we were before. And we're still in bad shape. There's no question about that. But at least we're making some progress. But in your opinion, what do we do about it?
Well, look, we need to speak up. We need to keep speaking up about this. We need to not take the pressure off, especially for these large social media companies. We know that we've exposed in Christian media, and a lot of our folks have exposed, what's going on behind the scenes in these companies with the DEI policies and other things. And that exposure has really made a lot of corporations rethink their stance in this. I think we have an uphill climb with the Silicon Valley companies, because if you read what Dr. Carson, read some of the writings that they have, Silicon Valley is kind of the new religion. They really look at technology as the savior of society. Mm-hmm. And if we just control what people get for information, if we just control what they think, then people will do the right thing. And as Christians, we know people don't do the right things just because you do the right things about the information you have. You do the right things when you're allowed to make choices on your conscience and to get all of the information available to you from both sides of the argument, not just one side of the argument. So we need to keep speaking up. We need to keep fighting for this. And look, we need to get informed. Christians need to listen to programs like yours and other programs to get informed in the issues. Get involved. It makes a difference in the direction of our country, who governs it. And as Christians, we have every right to be involved in that process. Don't let anybody shame you out of that. Get involved in the process.
And, our founders believed very much what you said. And that's why the press is the only business that's protected by the Constitution. It's because they were supposed to give the people unbiased information upon which to be able to make decisions. But, of course, they put not only their thumb, they put the foot on the scale. They have really distorted the system significantly. And our founders, when they studied all the various governments that had ever existed, one of the things that they found that always seemed to describe every government where they ended up: they grow, they infiltrate, and they dominate. And it's not necessarily because they're bad people. That's just the nature of the beast. It's just like a lion is not a bad animal because it kills a gazelle and eat it. That's what lions do. And that's what governments do. And that's why they work so hard to give us a constitution that would maintain our freedoms. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. I don't think the press even understands that, because what they should know, if they were smart, is that the first thing that communists and socialists and Marxists do is they completely control the media, completely control the press. So they're like digging their own grave, and they don't even know it by supporting those Marxist ideologies. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think there was a lot of good intentions. People have a lot of good intentions. Of course, we know the old saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But there were a lot of good intentions, but thinking that, they're helping people. But the problem with elitism, and I think our mainstream media and those, especially in our higher educational institutes, is the elitism attitude is that I know better what is better for you than you know what is good for you. And when you have that kind of attitude, when you think you know what's better for the population, for people than people do, then you really do undermine democracy. That's what happens. You begin to undermine it because you don't trust the very people that our founding fathers really trusted the country's hands in. And that's the population. That's the citizens of the country. And we don't understand that we don't actually live in a democracy. We live in a constitutional republic. The Constitution was put together in the First Amendment to that to enshrine those freedoms: the freedom of the press, the freedom of religion, the free exercise thereof, the freedom of assembly. These freedoms were the foundation of society. And if you take those away, if the government handles all the messaging, if the government decides when and where churches can meet and when and where you can talk about your religion, then the government takes over, as you said. They become the only voice, and they become the dictator. They become the totalitarian regime that then runs and stomps out everything. That's just Absolutely. The path we go. And I think you're right. I think many of those elitists don't understand that.
Well, the other interesting phenomenon that you can observe historically in nations that become communist is they dumb down the population. And as you were talking about a little earlier, people not following what's going on, not being aware of what's going on, those are people who are very easily manipulated. And I think that's why we're seeing it. We're even seeing it in our schools, in our elementary schools, in our middle schools and high schools, spending time talking about things that aren't essential to prepare you for life, with all kinds of social issues that really should be in the purview of the home and the parents. But in the process, our math scores are way down, our reading scores are way down, and history and civics. I mean, when you see some of those man on the street interviews and they ask people the simplest questions, they have no idea what you're talking about. Those are very easy people to manipulate. So we've got some real work on our hands. Why do you think Christian ideas are under attack in our society today?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've said this a lot, and I'll say it here. I think that Christianity, I think that the beliefs that we hold dear to us, and that we find the moral teachings that we find in the Bible and Scripture are the last firewall that's holding back this really progressive left-wing sort of communist push in our country. I think that's the last bastion of hope. It's the bulwarks right now that the left left knows they have to tackle, because if they can't tackle those, then people will understand there's always freedom, there's always hope, and that's the message the gospel brings. And so I think Christianity is under attack simply because of the moral foundations, of the principles, and of the values that it holds dear. And at those is really the right of our own conscience. And that's one of the things that the government wants to erase. If they erase Christianity, if the foundations of the Judeo-Christian beliefs are pulled out of erased to this country, then everything will fall behind it. And I just really strongly believe that.
Well, we've heard the term used particularly by the left, Christian nationalism. What do they mean by that, and what are they trying to do?
Well, look, what they mean by that, I'm not sure. What they're trying to do is shame Christians from being involved in the political process and the governing process of the country. They use this as a pejorative, as a negative to say, Christian nationalism, that's bad. You can't have those two words together. But look at all of the other movements across our country here. Is there such a thing as LGBTQ nationalism? Because they're pushing policies in governance here? Is there such a thing as used as socialist nationalism? Because we know they're out there pushing, policies for our government to adopt, or secular nationalism. Everybody is pushing some sort of view.
That's a very good point. That's a good argument. I hope people listen to that. Well, what do you think about the recent opening ceremony at the Olympic Games and the mockery of the Last Supper?
Yeah, look, mockery is the exact word for it. It was, there's no defense of that. That was indefensible. That was directly targeted at the beliefs of Christians and to show what the world really thinks of Christianity. And it's interesting because the left has always been, and especially the LGBTQ community, has always been about this respect and tolerance. We all we want is respect. All we want is tolerance for our beliefs. And yet they've really turned out to be the most disrespectful and intolerant people towards other beliefs. And that at the beginning of the ceremony was just that. It tells you what these world elites think. It tells you where they're going, and it tells you what they think of Christianity.
And, when you look at the field of broadcasting and television and media, have you noticed that it's almost impossible to look at any TV series these days without, in the first 5 minutes, them introducing some alternative to the traditional nuclear family? And, both the liberal and the conservative think tanks come to the same conclusion, and that is that children that are raised in the traditional nuclear family do much better on every level. And yet we have these introductions of the alternative to the family always as not only acceptable, but maybe as preferable. So it's not a small wonder that the kids grow up kind of confused, and, morals are just tossed out of the window, because the source of morality, of course, is our faith and our beliefs. And if you throw that out, then every man becomes his own gauge of what's right and what's wrong. And that's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, this world of relative thinking where all of right and wrong is relative to my situation or my position is the world that the left sort of wants to come to you. And you're right. The basic family structure, the family unit, a mother and a father and children being raised under that home, and being raised in a home that really understands that our morality and our laws come from God. They don't come from us because they have a foundation and they have a standard. That sets the standard in society, but that also raises, as you said, very healthy, very independent, very sound kinds of people, and those are the people you can't easily control. So how do you get people you want to control? Well, first of all, you tear the family apart. I was raised in a family of divorce, and that creates a lot of doubt in your mind. That creates a lot of instability in your life. And then you get a government that comes in and they start to tell you what is right or wrong, and that's really easy, as you said, to be persuaded or to be brainwashed. Right. But the foundation of the family is something the government used to support. We used to really push as an important part of society, and now it seems like to me we do everything to tear it apart. We need to get back to that. And as churches, thank goodness that churches still stand up, and Christian media still stands up and talks about the importance of the family. And anytime we see that takes hold in culture starts to move into the right direction, a safer direction, a more prosperous direction, and a more informed and educated direction, and a healthier direction. Every one of those parts of society moves forward when we have strong families that are the guiding principles, and not a state that's tearing them apart.
Absolutely. And what do you think are the goals of the communists and the Marxists in our country with respect to Christianity?
Well, look, the goal has always been on these kinds of movements is to replace God. That's the goal. The goal is to turn the government, to turn these elitists, to turn the leadership into God. That's where you should only find your hope. That's where you only find your direction. They're the saviors. They're the ones that are there to take care of you. That's what communism's wants you to believe. That's what these socialists want you to believe. And so the only way they can do that is to get God out of your life, to take religion out of that. That's why you find Bibles banned, why you find churches banned, why you find churches have to become state churches and can only teach certain things, because they have to get God out of the way. They have to get faith out of the way in order to replace themselves into that position.
That's exactly right. And, in the schools, starting back in 1963 with that Supreme Court decision, we've thrown God out. But recently, the state of Oklahoma and Louisiana have brought it back. They said, we're putting the Ten Commandments back in the schools. We're bringing the Bible back. We're going to read it. Of course, that's occasioning a whole bunch of lawsuits. It'll be interesting to see how that comes out. But, what should Christians be doing? Should they be making their voices heard on this issue?
They should be making their voices heard, and I think that's why we've seen such a huge movement in education right now, with so many states going to let parents make the choice of where their kids are educated and where their tax dollars go, so that your tax dollars can follow the education that you choose for your kids, because so many of these public schools today have gone routes that don't align with what most Christian parents hold as values, and even most parents. I think one of the things that COVID really exposed when these kids had to go to these virtual classes and their parents could sit down and listen in was like, what? You're teaching my kid that? I don't want my kid to be taught that. And then, of course, you had schools that said, oh, parents can't listen in now. Now we don't want parents to listen in because we don't want you to know what we're teaching our kids. But the school choice movement, I think, across this country is reflective of that. And I'm glad to see that a lot of parents and Christian parents are getting involved in that. But look, they should get more involved in their local school boards and local communities to make the decisions of what these schools teach today.
No, it's absolutely critical because, as the Bible says in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. Children are very impressionable, and you get them at that tender age, and it makes a big difference. And, of course, the Marxists know that, too. And that's why Vladimir Lenin said, give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted. That's why they're so anxious to get in our schools at an early age, indoctrinate our kids, confuse them about their gender, make them feel like victims or oppressors. All of these things obviously are very detrimental, and one of the reasons that people say that nothing's really changed, everything's the same. It's not. It's much more difficult to be a parent today.
Yeah.
Today, with the things that the kids are exposed to, and you've got to be incredibly vigilant if you're going to spare them from all of those things. But
yeah, vigilant and involved in their lives and their school. Because look, California has passed laws that tell the teachers to keep parents in the dark. You can't tell parents, so don't think the school system is going to help you these days. I know, when I was younger, parents would go to parent-teacher conferences and they would tell you about your children. They would tell you about what they're learning, how they're acting up, they're not, behaving or whatever. But not today. Today we have school systems that are deliberately keeping parents out and turning, as you said, kids against the parents. And the only way to counter that as parents is to be very involved in your children's lives. Know what they're doing. Talk to them about these issues. Don't think kids are look, the left understands that kids can be indoctrinated and kids can understand issues that we think are way beyond their age limits or their age. Parents need to understand that too. You need to talk to your kids about this and talk to them about the things that they're learning in their classes. They understand a lot more than we think they do.
Right. And making that family time a real priority. It used to be, it was very consistent. You had dinner together, you talked. Not so much anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a real problem because the values of a family get passed on in times like that. And when you don't have those times, you're going to get your values from somewhere else, like social media and your friends on the street and television. And these are not good places to get your values. And we're seeing that played out right now on our college campuses. Mm-hmm. As these students who really don't know their history, which of course gives you your identity, which of course gives you your beliefs, so they're like leaves blowing in the wind. And so along comes an organization like Hamas. Oh, and we're the oppressed, and other people are oppressing us, and just they're so easily swept up by whatever is going on because they don't have that solid foundation. And that really starts with the family and the identity that you gain from your family and the strength that you gain from them, which then allows you to resist all of those forces that are trying to take you away.
Yeah, because the other thing I think that the family gives us is, as you said, it gives us also identity. When you have strong families that can communicate and can talk about these issues and can be open about it, when you pass along, your Christian values, beliefs, principles to your children, then the children lock into your family ID. That's identification. That's something I remember from being young as a kid to lock in of who I was and into my family ID. And it was harder for the world to pull you away then. But when you don't have that, when you don't feel that connection to your family, to your siblings, to your parents, then it's, as you said, it's easy for the world to come in and to pull you away because you feel lost and adrift. And we talk to so many young people today. I hear it from youth pastors and across the country that the number one thing that these people, they feel adrift. They don't feel connected to anything. They've not really connected to their churches. They're not connected. We call them the nuns, right? They're not connected to their country. They're not connected to their communities. And so in come all of these other ideas, this idea of victimhood, the idea that Hamas comes in, we're victims just like you. And all of a sudden you see these kids, they're pulled in because they feel like, oh, this is something I can identify with. This is something I can connect. But it does leave them empty at the end of the day.
What do you think is the reason that church attendance has plummeted? Is it COVID or is it something else?
Well, COVID certainly didn't help any. I think COVID gave a lot of sort of mediocre Christians an excuse maybe not to go back to church or to say, I'll just watch it online. But I think look at the root of this, of why churches and Christianity attendance is down across the country. And look, the American Bible Society came out recently and said, the engagement that people are having with their Bibles is down also across the country this year and last year. And I think there's two reasons for that. One, we've seen a culture, as we said, that has attacked Christianity and has shamed Christianity and has pulled Christianity as much as possible out of all of the mainstream institutions. And so, kids that go off and go into high school and go into college, the first thing they come under is attack for their beliefs. And if you don't have a good foundation, it's easy to shed that. So that's one thing. The other thing, look, I'm going to say this, Dr. Carson, it really sets on a lot of the pulpits of America as well. The pulpits of America have taken this approach of a more watered down, seeker friendly kind of Christianity that has built very shallow roots into people. So when COVID came around, when somebody comes around and shames you in the workplace for being a Christian, the Bible tells us if we don't have those roots, then we're the house that's easily washed away if we don't have a strong foundation. And so churches that are not building that strong foundation, we're just seeing as the culture in the church becomes more and more under attack, we're just seeing people just drift away. They're being washed away because there's not strong roots. And that, unfortunately, really sits in the pulpits of America.
And not only are these churches weak, but we're seeing the advent of so many woke pastors who basically embrace some of the things that the Bible clearly states are an abomination, are things that God does not approve of. And somehow, with their silver tongues, they manage to manipulate these things into something that some unthinking people, Christians, will accept. And this is not to say that we shouldn't be accepting of homosexuals and bisexuals and transsexuals, but it does mean that we don't change who we are to be like them. That seems to be the problem. That's what you find going on in our society today. Acknowledge that there are some abnormalities, some differences in people, but we don't change the whole society to conform with that. We learn how to be accepting and tolerant and work with people and maintain our principles and let God do the judging.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you hit it there at the end. We maintain our principles. We maintain our beliefs. We don't let our beliefs be swayed or influenced by society or culture. We're called to influence society and culture. And we don't do it in such a way, as I think you put it, we don't do it in such a way that we then become the people that are intolerant and ostracize, communities or marginalized communities and put them out. We're called to speak the truth in love. And the ultimate love that we have for somebody is what will be their state when they stand in front of God, when they stand in front of their Creator. What will be their state? The ultimate love we have for somebody is about how they will spend eternity, not necessarily how they'll spend this temporal life. And we're called to do a lot of things in this temporal life. We're called to help the poor and to help widows and to do those sort of things. But if we compromise that and say, look, I'm going to accept you, I'm going to accept your lifestyle, I'm not only am I going to accept you, but I'm going to also embrace it that's just the way you are, even though the Bible says this is sin, this is wrong. Then what I'm saying to that person is, I care more about your temporal state than I do about your eternal state. And that's, as Christians, that's not where we should be. We should love people into eternity, not into some temporal comfort today. And we need to live that out.
Boy, we need to hear that a lot more often. And I guess that's one of the roles of Christian broadcasters to really get that message out there, what the real gospel is all about, because it's much more comforting and attractive than anything the world has to offer. But should Christians be focused on policy or personality when it comes to their voting habits?
Oh, yeah. Well, look, who are we voting for? That's the point of who are we voting for? What is the position we're voting, for? We're not voting for a popularity contest. We're not voting for somebody who's going in to win a popularity contest. We're voting for somebody who's going to govern over us, and that's the key to it. So what we want to be focused on is what kind of governance is this person going to bring to the office that they're running for, and that really goes down into what are their policies, what are the history of their policies, what are they telling you right now that their policies are, what kinds of things are they going to institute in that governance. And I think we often forget that's what we're electing people to do. We're electing them to govern and to lead us as a country and as a nation. And so we have to step back and ask ourselves, what kind of governance are they going to bring to the table? That's the kind of people, that's the kind of decision making and thinking that I feel like we should go into the process with.
That's exactly right. And I've heard so many people in the Christian community say, this person or that person has good policies and they have a good track record, but I could never vote for them because of some of the things that they say. And, I kind of liken that to a situation where you have a serious disease that could be cured by a very good surgeon. Would you rather have the surgeon who saves everybody but has a rotten bedside manner, or the one who has a silver tongue and kills everybody? I think maybe that may be the reason that God gave us these sophisticated brains, so that we could think those things through and do what actually makes sense. And, what makes sense for our children, our grandchildren, for the people who follow us. And it's really not so much personality. And when you go back through the annals of history and you look at our great presidents and great leaders, it's more about what they did than their personality. That's just not the big issue.
Yeah, look, all of us have flaws, and certainly personality shouldn't play into it. Now, look, I would agree that character needs to play a role in that as well. But here's, I think, one thing that I see. I see the imbalanced scales of character. We put more weight on one person's character than we actually do another. And, the kinds of policies, the kinds of things that we implement, that's a reflection of our character as well. And that should play into that character decision making that we go forward with this. And the other thing I'd like to say is we're voting for an office and for candidates, okay? Our vote is not some political statement that we're making out there. So to say I'm not going to vote for either of these two people, I'm going to go for third party, even though that I'm going to, that vote goes away. Our vote's not about a political statement. It's about setting down and say, who do I want to govern over me? And what kind of policies do I want? Who's going to govern over me? Just remember that when you walk into the polls, or if you don't walk into the polls and you complain about what's going on, remember you advocated your ability to go in and decide who is going to govern over you.
That's right. And those people who say, well, I'm just going to stay home. I just don't like this other guy and I'm just going to stay home. Well, when you're doing that, you're actually voting for the other side. And, I think about some of the wonderful people that I know who are involved in the pro-life movement, who are very irritated with our former president because he won't do exactly what they want him to do. and he's, through the Supreme Court appointments, gotten these things back in the hands of the states rather than making declarations. And I always say conversion is better than coercion, particularly in a diverse setting, because you're never going to get peace. You're never going to get real justice if the side that has power is forcing their will on the other side. It just does not lead to peace. It never has. It never will. But one of the things that's happening with abortion is a lot of people in the younger generations are becoming pro-life because they've grown up with an opportunity to actually see what's in the womb because of the technology that has developed. And when you see that little baby in there with arms and legs and fingers and a nose and a mouth who's moving, it's really hard to convince people that that's a meaningless bunch of cells. And, you know, those are the kind of principles that I think we should be standing up for. No matter what your belief system is, that's just logical. You don't kill living human beings. And, you know, as a pediatric neurosurgeon, I operated on a lot of premature babies. And I guarantee you, they had to have anesthesia. They felt everything. And yet, people tolerate them being torn apart with no anesthesia just because they're in the mother's womb. It's kind of barbaric, to be honest with you. And those are the things we can stand up for. You know, the book of Proverbs, chapter 24, verse 11 and 12, says, for the innocent who are being drawn unto death, did you say anything? Did you do anything? And doesn't he who knows everything know what you did or what you said? So it's not good enough just to sit back and relax. And, you know, a lot of Christians say, I don't think we're supposed to get involved. You know, we're supposed to lead our own lives and just leave it at that. We don't have a responsibility or a right or a need to get involved with other people are doing. What do you think about that attitude?
Well, I think that's a terrible attitude because, you know, the Bible also tells us we're to give an account for all that we do. And look, James talked about this when he wrote his letter to the church because that was the attitude, you know, of some in the early church that said, I have my faith in God and that really is all that matters. And my faith is between me and God. And James said, well, hold on, time out a second. If you have your faith, then it should bear fruit and it should be put into action. James wasn't saying that there's some sort of work salvation. He was saying that our faith, our salvation should cause us to go to work and to change and influence the society that's around us. And look at the lack of influence that we've had in our society. When I was young and started to get into this movement, we were very worried about, where the direction of the family was going, what was going on in the LGBTQ movement with adults. Now today we find ourselves, having to fight to protect middle school and elementary age kids who are being convinced that they're not the gender that they were born with and really causing their lives, these mutilations that are going on to affect their lives forever. And we don't allow kids to make decisions about driving. We don't allow them to make decisions about alcohol, about smoking, all kinds of things. And yet we turn around and say this decision that will affect the rest of their lives, they're old enough to do that, to take that and make that decision. And I'll add this on the pro-life movement. I'm certainly not happy with the direction that the former president has gone, but I do know this. I have a much better chance of staying in the pro-life fight and influencing the president. Look where he's, the former president, where he was changed because some people told him what Amendment 4 down in Florida was really about, than I do the current president or administration. I know I have no chance to influence or change their far radical view that would not only murder children in the womb, but has gone so far to say they would murder children outside of the womb and not even rescue children who came out of a botched abortion. They would leave them on the table to die. I have no chance to influence that kind of thinking, but I do have the chance to continue to influence people that at least are part way where I'm at, and I can influence them to come all the way. And so that keeps us and keeps me in the pro-life fight, and it keeps the hope going forward with an administration like that rather than one I can't influence at all.
Exactly. You know, reversal of Roe v. Wade is the beginning of the fight. It's not the end of the fight. And we need to keep fighting until we reach a point where we have a society that actually respects and honors human life.
Amen.
Last question I want to ask you. What gives you hope?
The gospel gives me hope, and to know that Christ is on the throne and that God is sovereign and He's in charge. Look, as Christians, we know how the end comes. We know the end of the book. We know the hope that we have in God. I'm called to be involved in culture, to be involved in the democratic processes of the country God has given me, to be a citizen in, and to influence the culture around me. But my hope is not in government. My hope is not in government leaders. My hope is not in the culture. My hope is in Christ, who has already done the most important thing to me there could be, and that is to die for my sins. Mm-hmm. And so that is where my hope is. That is where my ultimate allegiance is. But that gives me a hope in mankind and a hope in people as well.
Well, I'll tell you, you have crystallized it very nicely. I want to thank you not only for being on the program today, but for your continued work on behalf of the citizens, not only of this country, but the citizens of the world. Such an important thing to be able to broadcast, to reach not only thousands, but millions of people throughout the world with the good news, and to influence people to do the things that are right and pleasing in the sight of the Lord. You know, we can get back. When you look at this country and the problems that we're having, they're all self-inflicted problems. We don't have to be going through all this stuff, but you're helping, and many other people out there are helping, and we just have to remember that if we're going to be the land of the free, we have to be the home of the brave.
Amen.
So thanks for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me and for all the work that you're doing as well.
Well, thanks again to Troy Miller for being with us today. It was very encouraging, the things he had to say. And for your prescription for this week, I would encourage everyone tuning in today to take our pledge to vote your values this fall. Go to AmericanCornerstone.org/vote to sign the pledge to join the fight to preserve the cornerstone values of faith, liberty, community, and life.